Hi everybody, I'm here today with another interview in the Fermented Cod Liver Oil series, and today we have the esteemed David Gumpert, my good friend. I do appreciate David as a journalist and as a friend. So thanks for being with us here today, David.
My pleasure. I'm really glad to be here with you, Emery.
David is one of these people who over the years has always been showing up. When we're at a raw milk, I always tend to see you in courthouses and rallies and, for all this political action going around food rights.
Yeah, I think Wisconsin and California,
you
Minnesota.
Came to LA. Yeah, I've seen you in a number of places. And you're just, honestly, you don't make a lot of money from this. You're a journalist, you're an author. But you're not like, getting celebrity endorsements or things like that. You're just doing the work every day and flying around the country and covering these issues. And I just want to let you know that there's a lot of people out there, myself included, who really appreciate your work.
Well, thank you very much. I got a good sense of it when I did a crowdfunding campaign last March, and I was really very touched by the response. I was seeking to raise $5,000 to help finish my latest book, the Raw Milk Answer book, and also to help with promotion. And I wound up raising about $11,000. And
wow.
And so many of the messages were just saying exactly what you said, how much people appreciated what I had been doing. So that really was very reinforcing to me because, fighting this this food rights battle is a lonely battle. I mean, the farmers can tell you that. It often seems very lonely anyway, and sometimes you don't realize that there are a lot of people out there who are following it pretty eagerly.
And, it's hard to get accurate information. So, being able to go to your website and keep up with what's going on. The other thing that's really great, so I'm going to tell you about David's books and his website so you know how to get there, because you may not have heard of David Gumpert. The blog is The Complete Patient. It's davidgumpert.com. We'll have the links below. The books, you started with the Raw Milk Revolution, which is a fascinating read. I really recommend that book. Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Food Rights. And now the most recent book is the Raw Milk Answer book, correct?
Yes.
So great information in these books. David, one of the best things about your blog are the comments. Because really what you've created there is a community of people who, as I told you, I guess it was a couple weeks ago, I said, this is like Dickens. Dickens used to publish in a newspaper sequentially, in installments, and it's like the Pickwick Papers over at Complete Patient. We can go on there and see what's the latest, when you publish a new, something that's going on. And this controversy around the fermented cod liver oil has been moving very quickly, and there's lots of stuff happening.
There's a lot of stuff happening, and it's been amazing to me how much interest there is. I really did not expect that. I've never had. Let me just put it this way: I've had. If I get 40 or 50 comments on a blog post, that's a lot. And on the posts about the fermented cod liver oil, some of the posts have been getting more than 200 comments.
Wow!
So it's really quite amazing, and they're very emotional comments in many cases,
and very polarized,
and very detailed. And people are spending a lot of time
thinking
about this and writing their thoughts down and writing and sharing their knowledge, because there are people who have scientific knowledge about oxidation and lipid oils and all the things that are kind of at as part of this whole issue of whether the fermented cod liver oil is safe and is it nutritious and all those things.
Mm-hmm. It was a shocking report that Kayla Daniel put out. Many people were shocked. I was. So for me, being able to go to your blog and continue reading about what's going on, I didn't, because otherwise I just felt like it kind of quieted down and things, like especially after the response came from Weston Price.
Yeah, I mean, I expected that things would quiet down, and they didn't. I mean, if anything, they picked up. It's been well. I should say, when this first started, when Kayla actually issued a report, and I haven't really talked about this, but I called a couple people who were close to Sally, and I said, you've got a crisis here. This is you need some crisis consulting, crisis PR consulting. You need to get ahead of the story because this is a very serious story, a very serious allegation or series of allegations, and I was told that no, Sally's not interested in that. That she really doesn't want to hear about that, and they didn't even want to talk to her about it. And so the whole thing has just kind of unfolded, almost like I think a few people have said it's almost like a Shakespearean tragedy or something, because. What we've seen is this this organization that has such tremendous loyalty and such tremendous devotion from so many people, because it's talked to people in ways that they haven't been talked to about what they should eat and about what they should feed their children and what not to give your children and then encouraging them to shift from the conventional standard American diet to a more nutritious diet. And people just have a tremendous depth of feeling for Weston A. Price Foundation. I'm one of those, and because I've been very much affected in terms of my my own diet, and then it's been a real important factor in encouraging me to stand up for small farms and small farmers, and so it's encouraged me in my writing, and to see this kind of this situation unfold and in the way it has, it's just been very discouraging and very disheartening to me, and I know to a lot of other people. Totally. It's been very divisive.
Totally, and I get that, and I feel that too, and it's. But I think some of us kind of felt this happening years before. Were you one of those people that kind of felt some of these rumbles years before? Or was
I always knew there was a kind of an ideological component to the foundation. And I should, to really, I mean, when you talk about the foundation, you're talking about Sally Fallon Morell, because she is, the leader and the driver of the whole thing, and there's I'd say an ideological aspect to her. There's a rigidity in terms of viewpoints, and there was another aspect which I had some inkling of, but I always tried to kind of put it aside and not think about it too much, and that is the concern about safety and the safety of food, because it comes up a lot with raw milk, and the reason the government doesn't want us to have access to raw milk is because it's supposed to be unsafe, and I think that we've those of us who've bothered to read a lot and learn about it and to use it. Have discovered that it isn't necessarily unsafe. In fact, it's if it's produced correctly, it is very safe. But there have been some instances where farmers cut corners and farmers didn't do a good job in producing raw milk, and people got sick. And I always tried to be empathetic in those situations and understanding, and because the people who get sickest usually are the children, because children tend to drink a lot of milk, and so so I always was a little bit concerned when I didn't hear a lot of empathy from the foundation in those handful of situations. There were maybe 4 or 5 outbreaks that really were. Just bad hygiene by the farms, or just not enough testing, or not enough experience in doing what you have to do. And I never got the sense that there was that concern. So I would write about it. And in those situations where there were illnesses and there were and it was a bad situation. There was a situation in, I think it was Oregon, called Foundation Farm, where a number of children got very sick, hemolytic uremic syndrome from E. coli 0157H7, and the complications around that. And it really was, it looked like the farm just the farmers didn't have enough experience to do what they were doing. And I never got, I wrote about the problems. And actually out of that situation, Mark McAfee started the Raw Milk Institute because he was so upset about what was going on there. And but I never got the sense that the foundation was as concerned as maybe it should have been. And so when this thing broke with the fermented cod liver oil, I saw this as another situation where, it looked like, from what Kayla reported from her tests and from her observations, people were getting sick, and she had identified some of the reasons they might have been getting sick, from the rancidity in the cod liver oil, and that would be the big issue, and also just not having or thinking they were getting nutrients that maybe they weren't getting, and so they weren't paying attention to what they would have been paying attention to. So, and you had the situation with Ron Schmidt, who got very sick, and he was one of the people who came out and came forward and described his illness and his serious heart problems and how he nearly died. And I just expected that somehow that the foundation would say, hey, geez, that's disturbing. I mean, here we have Kayla with these findings from her objective testing, and here you have Ron Schmidt, who's been very much involved with the foundation and a big supporter, and here he's nearly died. I thought that there would be some expressions of empathy and saying, hey, this is disturbing. We owe it to ourselves to try to find out a little bit more about this. I didn't not only did I not hear that, I heard the opposite. I heard that can't be. That they couldn't have gotten. If Ron got sick from the cod liver oil, then it must have been about something he did. He took too much of it, and it couldn't have been a problem with the fermented cod liver oil. And I was just totally taken aback that there wasn't any understanding or in the least. In fact, it was just the opposite of that.
Yeah, that was the first post that went up after so it was Kayla Daniel posted, and there was Aaron, Health Nut News posted, right? After Kayla posted, and then you posted.
Yeah, Kayla sent me a note that said I'm going to be. I just put out this. I'm going to be putting out this study, and I'm actually going to be posting in a couple hours. So I'd appreciate it if you'd hold off. But here's the study, and so I looked at it and I said, "Wow," because I had written something about fermented cod liver oil about 10 months earlier. There were some concerns before the previous.
I remember that.
Foundation meeting that people were talking about it. And there was actually a post on a food blog in January of 2013.
Yes,
a woman wrote how she's given up fermented cod liver oil, and she wound up getting about 250 or 300 comments from people who said either, I take it and it's great, or else I've had problems as well, and I've had allergic reactions, or I've had reactions that I can't really. I'm not sure if it's entirely from the cod liver oil, but all I know is it burns and it tastes terrible, and I feel nauseous afterwards, and I have heart palpitations or whatever. There are all kinds of different, and so I wrote about that, and I actually interviewed Dave Wetzel at the time.
Oh, really?
And I really tried to be even-handed, and I think I was pretty even-handed in describing the situation, kind of the pros and the cons, because he has pretty good arguments about, well, people, if it's uncomfortable when they take it, they should just take it in capsule form, and he had answers for pretty much everything, it seemed. So, but I wrote about that.
Were his answers ever that maybe you shouldn't take it?
No. And,
that's really interesting because as I'm just about to post in the post that I'm about to write about it, Organic, they were selling the fermented cod liver oil for a number of years, and they didn't say that to people. What they said to people, because they got a lot of those calls too, their customer service line, and what they would say to people is maybe stop taking.
And I talked with them as well. Yeah.
Stop taking it for a while and see what happens. And in the words of Archie Welch from Organic, he said 10 times out of 10 when they stopped taking it, they got better. So
what I got from Dave Welch, in fact, I told him, I said I tried taking it for several months, and it was just it was so uncomfortable to swallow it that I felt like I thought there was something wrong with me because it was burning so much in my esophagus as it went down. And I thought I was maybe, I had some problem, and I should go to the doctor and have it checked out. And his reaction was, you probably should just take it in capsule form. And he actually sent me some capsules to take. And I decided, I don't think I'm going to do this. And I never did take it again. And I just, but at the start, I guess at that time, I wasn't hearing about like the serious heart problems that Ron talked about. I was hearing, it sounded more like it was just disagreeing with people, which is a little different. It's not just the level of seriousness isn't quite the same. So I described it, and I described my own situation and so forth, but it didn't get, and I don't even think I interviewed Sally, and I never made much, I just never made much of the connection, except I think I pointed out that they're a big sponsor, and you see their exhibit, first thing when you come into the conference, but I didn't really get quite the depth of the seriousness of it until Kayla got her report.
Okay, that's interesting because I did years before. I really did know about it years before, but then I went through my own personal crisis the last couple of years and really was disconnected, just because I was trying to deal with my own life. So I stopped taking it in 2012 because I was at that conference in San Francisco. I don't know if you went to that one in 2012.
I don't think so. That's
the one where Organic was there, and they had put out that pamphlet about the history of cod liver oil, and brought up concerns. But again, they had customers who were week after week calling in and saying, my kid's been on the GAPS diet, we've been doing everything the way we're supposed to, and we're not seeing any improvement. And lots of these people, so it wasn't just that they couldn't digest it, although there was a lot of those too. They wouldn't take it, they had allergic reactions, eczema, things like that. But also, this was interesting because what I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but what I even told people was if you have a hard time taking it, it's because it's fermented, and so you might be having like a die-off reaction.
Right.
But now we've learned it's not actually fermented.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I did write about how there was a problem with Organic, and because they can't. I think it was Dan Corrigan who first actually brought this up to me. And it was, I know Dan from way back, so he was just kind of bouncing things off of me to, because he had been told by Sally that, if he said anything bad, that they didn't, or even just mentioning any of the stuff, like I think from the 2012 conference, he had been threatened to, to not be allowed to display at the any of the future conferences, and he was upset about that.
I didn't know that. I knew
he was told by, and I did write about that in my blog post.
Okay, I got to go back and read that blog post because I think I was.
Yeah, it was, but it was a strange. So I mean, but I coming from him, you could always say, or in terms of me as a journalist, I was always a little skeptical because obviously he's a competitor,
right?
And what does he have to gain? And so that's the question you always, or at least I tend to ask. I mean, in a business, it's a business situation,
sure,
and it's a health situation and it's a business situation,
sure,
and that was.
But it's gone beyond.
It was hazy. It was still kind of hazy when I wrote about it.
Yeah.
But then Kayla kind of sharpened the whole thing. But that's why I knew it was significant because I had some familiarity with it from having written about it.
Right. And it's gone beyond just Dan and Archie. I mean, that's the thing. People bringing them up, but it's like there's been so many people talking about it. It's, according to Kayla and according to Dr. Ron, I heard about it. I mean, even Mark McAfee commented on your blog that he had heard about it. A lot of people have been hearing about it. So it's kind of bizarre for people to say, oh, they created this big conspiracy. They must be really powerful if they can, create some kind of conspiracy like that.
Well, I mean, I haven't even talked to those guys since this thing started. I talked to them, back a year ago when I wrote about it, but I almost intentionally haven't wanted to talk to them about it. I had a little bit of interchange with Dan here and there, just on email, something to the effect, "Wow, did you think this would ever go like this?" And he said, "No, I never thought this would be, such a huge thing." I think he just had his concerns that it wasn't agreeing with some people and wasn't. And like you said, I think what they did at Core Organic was they found that their customers weren't doing well or weren't benefiting necessarily, and so they kind of went on this whole trek of their own to find a new a source of cod liver oil and something that was pure or not fermented.
And specifically because they've always said we're real foods for autism. They're really their target audience. They launched their probiotic Gut Pro at Autism One at that conference, and so they have a core audience, core customer base of autism spectrum disorder.
Right.
And so, what they told me was that they wanted to figure out how to make sure they could get some kind of decent, like, what are they going to, if they're not going to keep using the fermented cod liver oil or selling it, or at least for the people who couldn't tolerate it. Like, for all the kids who couldn't tolerate it, what are they going to take? Because there's actually, Sally brought this woman to the conference years ago. I think it was 2007, Dr. Mary Megson, and she was amazing. She talked about vitamin A and autism and how it can create really great improvements in children. But you want natural vitamin A. You don't want the synthetic. And so I think, it's important for kids on the spectrum to be taking cod liver oil. I really believe that. But if they can't take it, then what are they going to take? And so I think that was the impetus to try to look for, like you said, an alternative. So anyway.
They also, like you suggest, they just had to be real careful. I mean, I think anyone who's in that business of selling nutritional supplements has to be real careful. In fact, I wrote a blog post about how I was in that business for a short time before I started my blog, and how nervous I always was that somebody might get sick from the supplements I was sending out. I wasn't even making the stuff, but I was sending out a variety of supplements to people, and I always had this. I think it just went from the beginning. I just had the sense that if you're selling something that people are actually ingesting, that's a huge responsibility. I don't care what anyone says. I mean, at least. Because they're putting that stuff in their body, and if they have a bad reaction, I mean, you're partly responsible.
Right.
And so I always felt, or I can appreciate what they're going through, because they're not only selling supplements, but they're selling supplements to a subgroup that is very sensitive and more sensitive than most people. So you really want to do it absolutely right. So you have to be real careful. But that kind of gets back to, my amazement that there hasn't been more understanding from the Weston A. Price Foundation, that they don't appreciate, it seems, that element that Dave Wetzel or anyone who's a sponsor is selling food or supplements that people are ingesting, and so you have a responsibility, really, because you're endorsing it. You're allowing them to come to your conference, and you are advertising them in your magazine and online, and you're trying to encourage people to buy what they have so that they get benefit from the conference. And when it doesn't work out, you would I always just expected, as a matter of course, that there would be kind of pullback and like, well, we better just hold off here. Maybe Dave, maybe you shouldn't come to this particular conference, or if you come, maybe you should have some signage out there that there's been some difficulties, or something that would indicate concern about this.
Yeah. Let's talk about the comments on your blog. And I encourage anybody to go, and if you're interested in this and you want to delve into it, it's really kind of fun. You know what I love about your blog are those little vote up and down buttons that people vote.
Right, that's a new. Yes, since we moved to the current host, we have that option, and people are really taking advantage of it.
It's nice to see the comment. So, if you have like a -10 next to your comment, it's like people don't like it, and then if there's a...
I don't think people are liking what I'm saying.
And I've been watching it since, I've made a couple comments, but not, I think I made one early on, but I don't usually say much, because I was working on getting my blog out and, putting my stuff out there before I wanted to really comment. It's been interesting to me because the early, when you first posted about it, the comments, there was a lot more negative comments. There were
a lot of negative comments, and it was upsetting to me to see that much criticism. I'm pretty used to it. I've been writing this blog since 2006, so it's like, what is it, going on 9 years?
Wow.
And I've had my share of criticism, so I have a thick skin about criticism, but this was more than I'd ever experienced before.
People actually said you were a bad journalist.
I was a bad journalist. I was betraying the food rights movement. No, I wasn't just. I was not only incompetent, but I was a traitor. I was like, oh, geez.
An incompetent traitor. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. They and you could also tell from the voting up and down what the general opinion was, consensus was, or not consensus, but opinion was among these different commentators. And but I've seen that it's more the people on there now that are still talking about it, that are still commenting, are much more, what would you say? They're more in favor of what you guys are doing, the Amigos.
Well, there's more a sense of, people having seen the light, as it were. I mean, it's understandable when you come down to it, that here all these people, myself included, very much devoted to the Weston A. Price Foundation and very admiring of Sally Fallon Morell, and all of a sudden this guy, this guy comes along and just says that, hey, they aren't concerned about safety, and they should have done things a lot differently, and he's being very critical, and it was. I can understand that people don't want to accept that right away. It's a similar kind of thing that people go through when they learn that the truth about our food and our agricultural system and our medical system, our health care system, that all these people in charge, all these corporations and
that we can't trust them.
The health people aren't necessarily concerned first and foremost with our health.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that they're concerned about their jobs, or they're concerned about their profits, or they're concerned, you know, about you know, their ongoing prosperity, whatever. And they're really trying to make the most money they can in many cases at our expense. And it takes a while for many people to kind of accept that, because it means, you know, kind of it's at odds with everything you learn kind of in civics and in history, that, you know, that we have this benevolent government that where the people and these corporations that are allowed to operate, and everyone cares about at the end of the day, you know, all this food wouldn't be out there if it was bad. I mean, that's kind of the
right.
sense that a lot of people have. And then when they find out that's not the case, it's a big it's a big change, and it shakes people to their foundation, and because it means once you start questioning your food and your drugs and the medical care, what else is wrong? You know,
exactly.
What else is wrong in our system?
And when it's coming from an organization like the Weston Price Foundation, who that we've relied on and we've really trusted to be the ones that we could trust.
These other people, these other people don't, you know, are giving us bad information for their own self-interest. But Weston Price, you know, they give us the real story, and they tell us. And in fact, I had someone write a comment that said, "Wow, all this time, you know, I finally found the Weston Price Foundation to kind of explain things to me, so I didn't have to go and look at all these different studies, and they told me what to do, what to eat, and what to, you know, what was good and what was bad. And now I can't believe that. It's so terrible." I mean, that's what he was saying. He was like, you know, he felt betrayed, and I think that's. But not everyone immediately felt betrayed. I think many people initially felt very defensive, like, who's this guy? You know, we've got our, you know, the Weston Price Foundation is good, and they're standing up to evil, and he's saying that they aren't necessarily all good. So I didn't say they were evil, and I still don't think they were evil,
no.
But they were a little more in the gray area.
You know what's funny is I talked to Kathy Raymond, who we had her video about the horrible rash that she had, and the weight gain and the inflammation, and she said, because you know she ran all the conferences all these years, and she said in 2012 when Corganic put out that booklet about which I likened to the Protestant Reformation, you know, it was like the 95 Theses tacked up on the wall, and everybody, you know, what is this? And Kathy's, and it wasn't about fermented cod liver oil, it was about the history of cod liver oil, and it was bringing into question, is this the traditional way that throughout history that cod liver oil was consumed? Or not so much is this, but what is the history of cod liver oil? How did it get consumed? What's the best way to take it? These are legitimate questions. But anyway, Kathy said when that happened, she was like, "Who are these guys? What are they doing? You know, how can they do this?" She was really angry.
Yeah.
So it does tend to happen that shoot the messenger. And I'm sorry that happened to you, but that's part of the job, I guess.
Yeah, that's part of the job. I understand that, and as you suggest, over this story broke at the end of August, and so now here we are 2 months later, and kind of there's been a shift, as you observed, and I can see it on my blog as well.
Now, here's a question: is it just because I don't know what your traffic is, but is it just because those people went away and they're no longer commenting?
Well, I think that may be part of it. I think what happened was there was this kind of this huge expression of outrage by many people. I mean, there were people who were sensitive to what I was saying and were listening, but there was this other kind of large segment of expressing outrage, and they would, some of them were people. I wrote about this. People who I considered really good friends. Who were saying that I was, as you said, I was practicing bad journalism, and I didn't know what I was talking about, and I was being disloyal, and I was doing this, that, and the other, and I think what happened was some of them said, "Well, I'm just not gonna upset myself and go and read all that stuff anymore. I'm not going to, and I'm going to go somewhere else. And then there were some who I think were told, basically, Sally Fallon Morell put out the word via the internal Weston Price listserv that she didn't want people, chapter leaders in particular, linking to my blog, and she didn't really want people paying attention to what I was saying, and what Kayla had said. And so I think there was a little bit of a sense of, well, if we just ignore them, maybe they'll go away. And
just so bizarre, David, because what I'm laughing to myself because I remember when you keynoted the conference for your book, Raw Milk Revolution.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we'll listen to him when he talks about something we like, but we're not going to listen to him if he brings up things that we don't want to look at. Right.
Well, I think as I wrote in one of my posts, about Weston A. Price Foundation's quote shame, what they were doing increasingly was behaving like the regulators I talked about in my keynote address. I was talking about the kind of the brutality in many cases of the regulators coming down on small farms and shutting them down for extended periods and sometimes putting them out of business. And here was Weston Price Foundation kind of acting in many respects like these regulators.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like...
I've heard people say that too. I've heard people say that they're acting like Monsanto or like these pharmaceutical drug companies that use their own studies, or the tobacco companies that use their own, like the whole thing with Chris Masterjohn. And it's like, well, he says it's okay, so it must be okay.
He's on the payroll.
Yeah.
I mean, he's. I respect him a lot, and I felt badly seeing him kind of get caught up because I wasn't saying, and I don't think other people were saying that he had done bad analysis or bad research or bad testing or anything like that, but rather that as good as what he was saying might have been, as accurate as it might have been, it was called into question because he was being paid by the Weston A. Price Foundation. Right. It was almost like no matter what he said, it was going to be called into question. And that's like, as you say, that's like what Monsanto does. They have their own scientists. They have scientists at universities where they give a lot of money, and they say, good things about genetically modified crops and so forth.
Right. So, but I agree. I like Chris too, and it was really unfortunate. And I feel, honestly, I think there's so many of the people in this whole scenario that we do care about, that we do love and are friends with, and so it's very difficult to see the community divided. But I think you've just remained the objective kind of person that you are. I mean, you're not being objective. That was the one thing I want to bring up, is I'm sure people probably say that to you. How can you're supposed to be a journalist, therefore shouldn't you be reporting both sides? And, you're not really being unbiased here. What do you say to that?
I always was, I think that's a fair question. Journalists argue among themselves about how they should present information and how they should present stories. And there's kind of a faction within journalism, and you see this faction more in the mainstream media, where the argument is, well, they should be, quote, objective. And the objective means you report, the pros, and you report what the negatives say, and you let the reader decide. Mm-hmm. I always, I don't fully agree with that. I think, especially practicing the kind of what I would call advocacy journalism that I see myself practicing, and I think most bloggers are practicing that, really, whether in some way or another. I mean, blogging kind of inherently calls for the bloggers to take a stand, to have an opinion. If you don't have an opinion, people aren't as interested to read about it. I mean, people are looking for some guidance in what they should think. Mm-hmm. And so I've generally taken a stand on issues, what was, and the problem here for many people is I was taking a stand that they didn't like, they didn't appreciate. But I always made it a point to present both sides of the story. Whenever when Sally came up with a long question and answer thing, or Dave Wetzel came out with a long statement, I gave that a lot of attention. I just critiqued it, maybe in ways that they, I'm sure, didn't like, because I thought that their statements really didn't address the big issues. And in fact, I did a post about Sally Fallon Morell's Q&A, and pointing out, 6 questions or 7 questions that she didn't answer.
Right.
That people really were.
And maybe she could have then read that and then replied back, right? Like,
yeah.
Which would have been great.
But she didn't, and she kind of became more defensive, and started telling the chapter leaders not to link to me and all that sort of.
Yeah. So let's talk about the chapter leaders issue. So, and I think people will, after watching this, want to go back and read some of these posts they might have missed on your site. These are all on there. You can kind of just go back through his art.
Yeah, start around August 24th or 25th, and just click through. It's very, very easy.
The chapter leaders. So this was last Saturday, right? That you posted about the Santa Cruz chapter. Was that last Saturday?
Yes. Well, I mean, it goes back a few weeks before then. When actually, one of the interesting things in all this is a good number of chapter leaders have been feeding me information from the confidential listserv that the chapter leaders get access to.
Chapter leaders were feeding you information?
Yeah, they were sending me the posts from the listserv, and because they were upset about it. Wow. And they wanted me to see what was being said.
Oh, right. You did post that. That's right. I remember.
Yeah, so part of what was being said was Sally threatening the chapter leaders that if they linked to my blog or they linked to Kayla's report, she would excommunicate them. She didn't use that word, but she would remove them as chapter leaders because they would be violating the trademark agreement that they had. And I think a lot of people took that as, well, that's kind of like an empty threat. And then last weekend, she followed through and wrote the Santa Cruz chapter a letter. It was really a legal letter saying that they were no longer chapter leaders, basically, and they were no longer to post information on Facebook.
Could she take their Facebook page, or no? She can just not let them use it?
No, but she threatened, basically, she said, I want you, as of this moment, you can't use our insignia and you can't use our name on Facebook, and please take it down, because you have violated the trademark agreement, which basically says if we don't like what you say about our trademark, then we can take back the right that you have to use it.
Right.
And so they alerted me that had happened. And so I wrote about that. And I think for a lot of people that was like a final straw kind of a thing.
Why do you think that?
Well, because there have been all these other things before where Sally had been very defensive with her response in the first place. She continued to encourage people to purchase Fermented Cod liver oil. She made the threat to take to go after chapters and chapter leaders, and then she actually followed through. So it was kind of like this, doing all these things that were defensive and aggressive and not understanding of the concerns that people have. She was just acting, to many people, she was acting like an autocrat herself. And I say that, with regret, but that's, I think, how she's been perceived, as being very autocratic, as opposed to being sensitive or understanding.
Yeah, I've heard that a number of times. And what's the result after that post? I'm curious. So you said you heard from chapter leaders before that. What have you been hearing since then?
I think what we're seeing is with our new organization, that more chapter leaders are expressing interest in attending. And
really?
Yeah. We've had a number of chapter leaders who after that post said, "I'm coming to your conference," and or "I want to support what you're doing." And I know of at least a half a dozen of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's telling. Yes. Well, I did hear from a couple who reached out to me just by text message to say what's going on, because I am a former chapter leader, and and I know, and they know that I know a lot of what's going on, or I guess I assumed that I did. And they saw me posting on Facebook too, I think on my personal page. So they wanted to know, like, what's the inside story? What do you know? And so I talked to a few of them, but yeah, it's really interesting. And now that after Saturday happened, when the Santa Cruz chapter had that happen, and after your blog, I did email Dr. Ron and asked if they're going to be having chapters, and volunteer for the first chapter, the LA chapter for the new organization.
Yeah, well, I think we've started getting that question from people who are asking about it. Are there going to be chapters, and are there going to be chapters in my area? Because what they're saying really is, I'm not sure if Weston Price is going to have a chapter. I would like to have a chapter of some.
Oh. I did hear that from one or two chapter leaders saying they said that a couple of them said that there was a lot of fear in the air, that they weren't sure that they're going to do the wrong thing, that even speakers coming to their potlucks were worried about saying the wrong thing. Could they get in trouble if they did? How do they know if they do something they might get in trouble? And that made me really sad, because that's not the kind of atmosphere we want for people to be scared. But let's talk about this culture of shame before we have 5 or 10 more minutes. And I did want to touch on this with you, because I thought the one post that you did, and I remember you telling me you were a little nervous before you posted it, just because it is kind of Weston Price shame. Was kind of really putting it out there, and you didn't mince words. And there's been a number of people who have been very outspoken on your blog, which, I think it's good. I think discussion is good. I think we should be having these conversations. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was upset about, I went for a couple of weeks there where I didn't post anything, and yet a lot of comments kept dribbling in. Mm-hmm. Many of them very defensive about what was going on. In other words, going into these long, detailed analyses about why fermented cod liver oil is really safe, and why fermented cod liver oil is fine, and why we shouldn't worry about it, and why Dave Wetzel and Green Pasture are great people and great organization, and with these and I guess and all this happening in spite of rapidly mounting evidence to the contrary. We had not only Kayla's report, but then we had more and more reports, and some of them on my blog, some of them coming into Kayla, from people who said, they had heart problems, or relatives had heart problems who were taking the fermented cod liver oil, or other kinds of symptoms like you mentioned with Kathy Raymond, rashes or other kinds of allergic kinds of reactions. And I felt like the people who were writing this just aren't paying attention. They aren't taking any of the concerns in. And so I wrote. What I said was was that these the organization, the Weston A. Price Foundation, was appearing more and more like the organizations that we were fighting against like the Monsantos and like the FDA, and that these concerns that people were expressing, or these descriptions of symptoms that people were having, didn't really count. And that's what the FDA says. When people say how raw milk helps them, has improved their health, the FDA says, well, that's anecdotal. That doesn't really matter. It doesn't count. And we were basically in the same position, or Weston A Foundation was in the same position. These people who were part of the foundation were saying that these complaints don't really count. I mean, it must be because they're taking too much of it, or it must be because I don't know what they were. They really weren't saying much about the people who were taking it and experiencing bad reactions. And so it was, they were just ignoring it in many cases. And so I posted about what I thought was shameful behavior in just ignoring all these people who were coming forward and making believe that their stories didn't count for anything. And we were being just as bad as the people we criticized for so many years. So that upset a lot of people.
Yeah. But I mean, so after the response came from Weston Price, it was about a week after the report came out. I mean, I don't know, what did you think when that response came? Because I'll tell you what I thought. I don't see how they can come back from this. I don't see how the Weston Price, unless they would issue something saying we're sorry or something, but I just don't see how they can come back.
Well, that was the point. But that is the point. I mean, if they still could have come back if they were willing to somehow accept some responsibility for what was happening, and or even if they didn't accept responsibility, accept or show some sense of compassion.
Oh, you know what? That's exactly it. Because you said that, and I felt that way too. I forget what you said, but what really bothered me about her response, Sally's response, was that she said her biggest concern from all of this was Dave Wetzel's business and his family.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, wow. Her friend of 30 years almost died?
And she's worried about this guy's business.
Well, I mean, unless she just has so much cognitive dissonance that she can't even connect that what happened to Ron had anything to do with it. And I think that's how they're thinking, these people who are... But it's kind of like the vaccine injuries. You know, that's the other thing it makes me think of. I'm here in California. We're dealing with this huge mandatory vaccine thing that just went through. And, you know, there's all these people that I know already because they've been commenting on my blog for years. Oh, right, when my little boy was 18 months old, he stopped making eye contact and babbling the day after his MMR shot.
Yeah.
Story after story after story like that. And you start to see a pattern and you're like, you know, but then the pharmaceutical drug companies and the government say, well, that's just coincidence.
Yeah. Right.
You know, it's just a coincidence that it happened the next day.
Those are just anecdotal.
Anecdotal.
Yeah.
Because
all our studies show there's no connection.
Right. And there may be no connection, but let's talk about it. Let's look at it. You know, and that's why the hashtag for the autism community and the anti-vax is Hear This Well. Because remember that whole thing about this woman that said, Hear This Well, vaccines don't cause autism. So, you know, I think that's really, for me, and you know, that's why I'm so appreciative of your blog, because you're giving people a place to communicate.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to, and as you suggest, I think that the conversation has become more rational, and not necessarily everyone is agreeing with me, but it's just I think there's more acknowledgement that, hey, maybe there is a problem here, and maybe there is something that needs to be looked at more closely.
Well, I'm excited to see you in November at the first. Now the name just changed. You want to?
I know. I don't even. That's why I didn't refer to the name. I don't even know what the name is. Paleo Primal Price
Paleo Primal Price. Paleo.
Yeah.
Primal
Say that
Price.
quickly 10 times.
PPP. PPP. Yeah, so there was a trademark issue today, they said today, and so now there's a new name. So that's exciting. And
yeah, I look forward to seeing you. And there's a bunch of people coming, few people coming from California, which is great.
Really? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know who else coming. So I'm
Yeah,
excited.
Victoria, I think, is coming. And, a few people like that.
Yeah.
I think someone's going to pick that up.
Okay. Well, I think that's the bell is I think it's telling us we need to end this interview. So thank you, David, and I just want to thank you again for all your efforts, tireless efforts. You really are making a difference, and I appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much. I always appreciate all your great input and your great advice.
You're welcome.
Really helpful.
Okay, have a great rest of your day. I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Emery.